The morning light cast long shadows across the crystal towers of the Valdran Citadel. High above the purple clouds of Kepler 44b, the massive structure gleamed like a jewel against the alien sky. Inside the central spire, the High Council chamber buzzed with tension. Today would mark the end of Sovereign Taloneth's reign. Its reign and perhaps the beginning of something much darker. Taloneth stood in the center of the Judgment Circle, her forearms bound with energy chains that hummed with power. Her blue skin, normally bright with natural light, flickered weakly under the weight of the neural dampeners. The device around her neck made sure she could not use her telepathic abilities to influence the council members who sat in their high seats above her. "The charges are serious," announced Council Leader Veximer, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. The tall, gray-skinned alien's red eyes glowed with satisfaction. "Treason against the Galactic Alliance, conspiracy with human terrorists, and the worst crime of all, showing mercy to a lesser species." Taloneth lifted her head despite the pain from the dampeners. "I stand by my actions. The humans of New Sol are not terrorists. They are farmers, teachers, and builders. They have done nothing wrong." A wave of angry murmurs swept through the gallery where representatives from dozens of alien species watched the trial. The Draconians hissed their displeasure, their scaled faces twisted with disgust. The crystalline Zephyrians chimed in harmony, their musical voices creating a sound of disapproval. Even the peaceful Centaurians shook their heads sadly. "The evidence is clear," continued Veximer, gesturing to the holographic display that showed images of destroyed ships and burning cities. "Human vessels attacked our supply lines. Human weapons killed our people. And you, Sovereign Taloneth, gave them the codes to bypass our defenses." "Those images are fake," Taloneth replied, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "The attacks were carried out by pirates using stolen ships. The real evidence was destroyed before this trial began." In the observation deck high above the main chamber, Commander Lehan of the Earth Defense Corps watched the proceedings through the transparent aluminum barrier. His hands clenched into fists as he listened to the lies being presented as truth. He had been on New Sol during the supposed attacks. He knew the colonists there had been working in their fields and schools, not building weapons or planning raids. Hune was a compact man with dark hair and intelligent eyes. His military uniform bore the insignia of Earth Command, but he wore no decorations. He preferred to let his actions speak for themselves. Right now, those actions were limited to watching helplessly as the one alien leader who truly cared about peace was condemned to death. "The testimony is overwhelming," declared Counselor Zarthik, an insectoid being whose multiple eyes glittered with malice. "Witness after witness has confirmed that the Aquilian Empire, under your leadership, has been secretly arming human rebels." "Witnesses who were paid to lie," Taloneth shot back. "Show me one piece of real evidence. Show me one human weapon that came from Aquilian factories." But the council was not interested in evidence. They had made their decision long before the trial began. The human colony of New Sol had been growing too powerful, too influential. Their advanced farming techniques were feeding refugee populations across 3 systems. Their schools were teaching alien children alongside human ones. Their medical centers were treating patients regardless of species. This equality threatened the established order. For centuries, the Galactic Alliance had maintained peace through a strict hierarchy. Humans were supposed to be at the bottom, useful only for manual labor and military service. The idea that they could be equals or even leaders was unthinkable. "Too many council members, the verdict is unanimous," announced Veximer, rising from his seat. "Sovereign Taloneth of the Aquilian Empire is found guilty of all charges. The sentence is death by molecular dissolution, to be carried out at dawn tomorrow." The chamber erupted in cheers from some species and gasps of shock from others. The Aquilian delegation, seated in a special section near the front, remained silent. It expected this outcome, but hoped against hope that justice might prevail. Taloneth closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to stare directly at Veximer. "History will remember this day, not as the day you maintained order, but as the day you chose fear over progress." The humans you despise so much will outlive us all, because they understand something you have forgotten that strength comes from. Unity, not division. Take her away, Veximer commanded. And let this be a warning to any who would challenge the natural order of things. As the guards moved to escort Taloneth from the chamber, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the observation deck. Commander Hyan's expression was grim but determined. Their eyes met for just a moment across the vast space, and she saw something there that gave her the first hope she had felt in days. The guards. Massive beings in powered armor flanked Taloneth. As they led her toward the exit, she walked with dignity despite her chains, refusing to show weakness before her enemies. The crowd gradually dispersed, most satisfied that justice had been served. Others troubled by what they had witnessed, Hyan remained in the observation deck long after the others had left. He studied the layout of the chamber, memorizing guard, positions, and security protocols. His mind was already working on the problem, calculating odds and examining possibilities. The official position of Earth Command was to maintain diplomatic neutrality. They would not risk war with the Galactic Alliance to save one alien leader, even one who had shown kindness to humanity. But Hyan was not just following orders. He was following his conscience. Taloneth had risked everything to protect human colonists she had never met. She had stood up to the most powerful beings in the galaxy because she believed in doing what was right. Now she would die for that belief unless someone acted. As he finally turned to leave the observation deck, Yoon made his decision. Earth Command might not be willing to save Taloneth, but Lee Hoon was. He had less than 18 hours to plan and execute the impossible, a rescue mission. That would require him to infiltrate the most heavily guarded structure in known space. The Citadel had never been breached by an outside force. Its defenses were legendary, its security systems designed by the greatest minds of a dozen species. But it had one weakness that its builders had never considered. It had never faced a human who refused to accept that something was impossible. Walking through the corridors of the Citadel, Hin began to plan. He would need allies, equipment, and above all, he would need the element of surprise. The Council believed they had one. They thought the threat to their power was eliminated. That confidence would be their downfall. Tomorrow at dawn, they expected to execute Taloneth and send a message to anyone who might challenge their authority. Instead, they would discover that some humans did not know when to quit. Sometimes, that stubborn refusal to accept defeat was exactly what the galaxy needed. The detention complex lay deep beneath the Citadel's main structure, where the crystal walls gave way to cold metal and harsh lighting. Level after level of security barriers protected the most dangerous prisoners in the galaxy. At the very bottom, in the highest security cell, Sovereign Taloneth waited for death. Her cell was a perfect cube of energy barriers, designed to contain beings with telepathic abilities.
Ow.
The walls hummed with power, creating a constant buzzing sound that made it hard to think clearly. The neural dampener around her neck felt heavier with each passing hour, straining her natural bioluminescence until her blue skin looked pale and sickly. Taloneth sat on the simple metal bench that served as both chair and bed. Her forearms hung loosely at her sides, the energy shackles preventing any meaningful movement. She had tried to meditate to find peace before her execution, but the dampener made even that simple act difficult. I should have seen this coming, she whispered to herself. Veximer has been planning this for months. Truth was painful but clear. The Council had been looking for an excuse to remove her from power ever since she had started treating humans as equals. Her protection of the new soul colony had given them the perfect opportunity. Now, she would die, and her people would suffer under new leadership, chosen by the Council. Far above, Commander Lee Han moved through the Citadel's middle levels with practiced stealth. His Earth Defense Corps' uniform had been replaced with the maintenance coveralls of a Centaurian tech worker. The disguise was not perfect, but it would pass casual inspection in the dimly lit service corridors. Hyun had spent the last 6 hours studying the Citadel's layout through public databases and tourist information. The massive structure housed not just the council chambers, but also diplomatic quarters, trade offices, and maintenance facilities. Thousands of beings from dozens of species worked here every day, making it possible for one more alien face to blend in. His first stop was the communications center on level 15. The facility monitored all transmissions within the Citadel, but it also had connections to the outside networks. Hyun needed to send a message, but not through official channels. He had to reach someone who might be willing to help. The communications center was staffed by a single Zephyrian technician, her crystalline form humming softly as she worked. Hyun waited until she stepped away from her station, then quickly accessed one of the backup terminals. His fingers flew over the alien keyboard as he composed a coded message. Kilter, Guardian of the Second Circle, this is a friend of your Sovereign. She needs help. Meet me at the Water Gardens on level 8 in 1 hour. Come alone. The message was encrypted using an old Aquilian military code that Hyun had learned during his time as a liaison officer. If Kilter was loyal to Taloneth, he would understand both the message and the risk. Not Hein would have to find another way. An hour later, Jan sat on a bench beside the artificial waterfall that gave the Water Gardens their name. The space was designed to remind homesick aliens of their native worlds, with plants and water features from dozens of different planets. It was also one of the few places in the Citadel where private conversation was possible. The sound of running water, masking voices from electronic surveillance. "You are the human who sent the message," said a voice behind him. Hyun turned to see a tall Aquilian male approaching through the exotic plants. Kilter was impressive even by his species standards, standing nearly 7 feet tall with the broad shoulders of a warrior. His blue skin glowed with health and vitality, a sharp contrast to his sovereign's current condition. 4 arms moved with fluid grace, and his large eyes studied Hyun with intelligent suspicion. "I am Commander Lee Hyun of Earth Defense Corps," Hyun replied, standing to face the alien. "I was at the trial today. I saw what they did to her." "What business is that of yours, human?" Kilter's voice carried a note of warning. "Your people have already abandoned her." Earth Command issued a statement calling for calm and respect for the Council's decision. "Earth Command speaks for Earth Command," Han said firmly. "They do not speak for me. Your sovereign protected my people when she had nothing to gain from it. She risked everything because she believed it was right. She will die because of that kindness." Kilter studied the human's face for a long moment. "You realize what you are suggesting? The detention complex has never been breached. The security systems are designed by the best minds in the galaxy. Even if we could somehow reach her, the execution is scheduled for dawn. We have less than 12 hours. Then we better not waste any time," Hyun replied. "The Aquilian warriors?" Eyes widened slightly. "You are serious. You actually think this is possible?" "Think it is necessary," Hyun corrected. "Whether it is possible or not, we have to try. Do you have allies among the Guard? People who are loyal to Taloneth rather than the Council?" Kilter was quiet for several minutes, listening to the sound of the waterfall. Finally he spoke. "There are perhaps a dozen guards who would risk their lives for her, but they are scattered throughout the Citadel, and many of them are on duty tonight. We cannot simply gather them all together without raising suspicion." "We do not need them all together," Hyun said. "We need them in the right places at the right time. Tell me about the detention complex. What are the security measures?" "Layer upon layer of barriers," Kilter explained. "Energy fields, automated weapons, guard posts at every level. And even if we could reach her cell, the neural dampener prevents her from using her abilities. She would be helpless." "Not helpless," Haon said. "Just limited. But we can work around that." "What about the power systems? How is the detention complex?" "Powered through the main grid, with backup generators on each level." "Why do you ask?" Hyun smiled grimly. "Because every system has a weakness. I think I know what this one's weakness is." For the next hour, they discussed the details of the Citadel's security systems. Kilter's knowledge of the internal structure combined with Hyen's tactical training began to form the outline of a plan. It was dangerous, probably suicidal, but it was possible. "You understand that if we are caught, we will be executed alongside her," Kilter warned. "I understand," Hyen replied. "But if we do nothing, she dies anyway. And after her, how many others will suffer?" How many species will be oppressed because we were too afraid to act? Kilter nodded slowly. You are not what I expected from a human. Your people are supposed to be weak, cowardly creatures who think only of themselves. Some of us are, Hune admitted. But some of us remember that strength comes from doing what is right, not from doing what is easy. As they prepared to leave the water gardens, Kilter placed one of his large hands on Hyan's shoulder. If we do this, there is no turning back. The Council will never forgive us, and neither will many of our own people. We will be branded as traitors. Then we better make sure we succeed, Hune said, because if we fail, there will be nobody left to care what we are called. The two unlikely allies separated, each with tasks to complete before they could begin their desperate rescue mission. Hyan returned to his quarters to gather equipment, while Kilter began the dangerous work of contacting trusted allies without, alerting the security forces. Time was running out. In less than 10 hours, the execution would begin. But for the first time since the trial ended, there was hope. It was a slim hope born of desperation and courage, but it was real. Sometimes that was enough. The Citadel's defenders were about to learn that humans did not give up easily. When they found something worth fighting for, they would fight with everything they had, even against impossible odds. The twin moons of Kepler-4 for to be hung low in the alien sky, casting strange shadows through the crystal walls of the Citadel. In 4 hours, the execution would begin. In the depths of the structure, Commander Lee Hayen made his final preparations. For what might be the most dangerous mission of his life, he had changed into the black stealth suit that was standard equipment for Earth Defense Corps Special Operations. The suit would bend light around him, making him nearly invisible in dark spaces. More importantly, it would hide his heat signature from the thermal sensors that guarded the Citadel's most sensitive areas. Hune checked his equipment. More. Time. 3 small explosive charges, each no bigger than his thumb, but powerful enough to disable major systems. A plasma cutter disguised as a maintenance tool, emergency medical supplies in case Taloneth was injured. And most importantly, a small device that would disable the neural dampener around her neck. Are you ready? Asked Kilter, his voice barely above a whisper. The Aquilian warrior had also changed his appearance. Gone was the formal uniform of a palace guard, replaced by the simple clothes of a maintenance worker. His natural bioluminescence had been dimmed using a chemical spray, making him harder to spot in the darkened corridors they would soon enter. As ready as anyone can be for something this crazy, Hyon replied. Your people are in position? Day-ho. And Minsu are covering the main security station on level 12. They will create a distraction when we need it. Soyoung is in the power control room, ready to trigger the blackouts. The others are scattered throughout the upper levels, waiting for the signal. Hyon nodded. The plan was simple in concept, but incredibly dangerous in execution. They would create a series of controlled power failures that would appear to be attacks from within the Council itself. While the security forces were distracted by the apparent internal threat, Heen would infiltrate the detention complex and rescue Taloneth. Remember, Heen said, the key is to make it look like Council members are attacking each other. If they think the threat is external, they will lock down everything and our mission fails. I understand, Kilter replied. But you must understand something as well. If you are caught, I cannot help you. My people have orders to deny any knowledge of this operation. I would not expect anything else, Hyan said. This was my idea. If it fails, the blame should fall on me alone. They moved through the service corridors with practiced stealth. The Citadel's maintenance tunnels were a maze of pipes, cables, ventilation shafts that connected every level of the massive structure. Most species found them claustrophobic and unpleasant, which made them perfect for covert movement. Their first target was the primary power distribution center on level 17. The facility controlled electrical flow to the entire Citadel, including the detention complex. Hyan had studied the schematics carefully and identified the key junction points that would create the most chaos when damaged. The guard changes shift in 3 minutes, Kilter whispered as they approached the power center. When the new guard arrives, there will be a brief moment when both are distracted by the handover procedure. Hyan crouched beside a maintenance panel, his fingers working quickly to remove the cover. Inside was a tangle of cables and control circuits that would have confused most beings. But Hyan had trained on similar systems, and he knew exactly which connections to target. Now, Kilter said softly, Hyun placed his first explosive charge against the main power coupling. The device was set to detonate in exactly 12 minutes, giving them time to reach their next target. As they moved away from the power center, he activated a small transmitter that would send a coded signal to their allies. Throughout the Citadel, the next target was the communication hub on level 15. This facility controlled all internal communications within the Citadel, including the security networks that coordinated guard patrols. Disabling it would prevent the security forces from organizing an effective response to the power failures. 2 guards at the main entrance, Kilter reported, peering around a corner. But there is a service entrance on the far side that should be unguarded. They made their way through the narrow maintenance tunnels, crawling through spaces barely wide enough for their bodies. The stealth suit made Hyan nearly invisible, but it also made the already tight passages feel even more confined. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he fought off a wave of claustrophobia. The service entrance was protected by a simple electronic lock, kind used on non-critical systems throughout the Citadel. Hyan's plasma cutter made short work of the locking mechanism, and they slipped inside the communication hub without triggering any alarms. The main control room was dimly lit, filled with banks of equipment that hummed with electronic activity. A single technician sat at the central console, monitoring the flow of communications throughout the massive structure. He was a small, delicate being from a species Hyan did not recognize, with large eyes adapted for low-light conditions. "Leave him alive," Hyun whispered to Kilter. "We need him unconscious, not dead." Kilter moved with the fluid grace of a trained warrior, approaching the technician from behind. A brief struggle ensued, but the outcome was never in doubt. The technician slumped over his console, unconscious but unharmed. Hyun placed his second explosive charge against the main communication array. This one was set to detonate 30 seconds after the first, creating a cascade of failures that would spread panic throughout the Citadel's command structure. "Time to go," he said, checking his chronometer. 8 minutes until the first blast. Exited the communication hub through the same service entrance. But instead of returning to the maintenance tunnels, they took a more direct route through the main corridors. The stealth suit would hide Hyan from most sensors, and Kilter's legitimate access codes would get them through the security checkpoints. Their final target before the detention complex was the Central Security Station on Level 10. This facility coordinated all guard patrols and monitored the thousands of sensors throughout the Citadel. Disabling it would blind the security forces at the crucial moment when Hyan made his move on the detention complex. "This is where it gets dangerous," Kilter warned as they approached the security station. "There are 12 guards on duty, all of them experienced warriors. If we are discovered here, we will not escape." "Then we better not be discovered," Hyun replied. The security station was built like a fortress, with multiple layers of barriers and automated defenses. But like most defensive systems, it was designed to keep threats out, not to prevent infiltration from within. Hyan's knowledge of similar Earth facilities gave him insights into the blind spots and weaknesses that the designers had never considered. They entered through a waste disposal chute that connected to the main ventilation system. The passage was narrow and filled with unpleasant odors, but it bypassed all the external security measures. Within minutes, they were inside the station's main control room. The chamber was filled with holographic displays showing every part of the Citadel. Guard positions were marked with glowing dots, patrol routes were traced with colored lines, and sensor readings scrolled past in streams of data. It was an impressive display of technological capability, but it also revealed the system's central weakness. "All of this information flows through a single control node," Hyun observed, pointing to a device at the center of the room. "If that node fails, the entire security network goes down." "But it is protected by multiple backup systems," Kilter pointed out. "Even if you destroy it, the backups will restore function within minutes. Not if the backups are overloaded at the the same time, Heian said, placing his final explosive charge. The power failures will hit just as this device is destroyed. The backup systems will be struggling to maintain basic functions, and security will be their lowest priority. As they prepared to leave the security station, alarms began to sound throughout the Citadel. The first explosion had occurred exactly on schedule, plunging large sections of the structure into darkness. Emergency lighting activated, casting eerie red shadows through the crystal corridors. Phase 1 complete, Kilter said, his voice tight with tension. Now comes the hard part. They made their way toward the detention complex as chaos erupted around them. Guard units rushed through the corridors, responding to reports of attacks that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. The communication failures were preventing proper coordination, and the security blackouts were hiding the movements of both the guards and the infiltrators. The council members are starting to panic, Kilter reported, monitoring the emergency frequencies on his communicator. They are accusing each other of organizing the attacks, just as we hoped, Yun smiled grimly as they reached the final checkpoint before the detention complex. In the distance, he could hear the sounds of heated arguments as powerful aliens turned on each other in fear and suspicion. The deception was working perfectly, but now came the real test. The detention complex was the most heavily guarded area of the Citadel, and no amount of distraction would make it easy to penetrate. Hyun would have to rely on his training, his equipment, and his determination to reach Taloneth before dawn brought her execution. The shadows were his allies now, and he intended to use them well. The detention complex lay in complete darkness, broken only by the faint red glow of emergency lighting. The power failures had cascaded through the Citadel's systems exactly as Heian had planned, creating confusion and panic among the guards, but the detention complex had its own backup power, and the most critical systems were still operational. Heian moved through the corridors like a ghost, his stealth suit bending light around him until he was nearly invisible. The emergency lighting cast strange shadows that helped hide his movements, but he knew that thermal sensors and motion detectors were still active in the most secure areas. Level after level of security. Barriers stood between him and Taloneth's cell. Each checkpoint was designed to stop the most dangerous beings in the galaxy, with weapons and detection systems that could identify threats from dozens of different species, but they had never been tested against a human who refused to accept that. Something was impossible. The first guard post was manned by 2 draconian warriors, their scaled hides gleaming in the dim light. They were arguing about the power failures, trying to understand what was happening in the upper levels of the Citadel. Their attention was focused on their communication equipment, which was giving them only static and broken messages. Hyun approached from behind, moving with the careful steps he had learned during years of special operations training. The plasma cutter in his hand was set to its lowest setting, enough to disable the guards without killing them. He struck quickly and silently, and both Draconians collapsed without raising an alarm. 2 down, he whispered into his communicator, proceeding to level 2. The second checkpoint was more challenging. 4 guards from different species watched the corridors with weapons drawn. The power failures had made them nervous, and they were scanning every shadow for signs of threat. Heian would have to find another way past them. He studied the corridor layout through his suit's sensors, looking for weaknesses in their defensive position. The guards were positioned to cover all the normal approaches, but they had not considered the possibility of someone using the ventilation system above their heads. Hyun climbed into the air ducts, moving carefully to avoid making noise. The metal surfaces were cold against his hands, and the narrow space made it difficult to breathe. But he had trained in similar conditions, and he knew how to move without detection. Directly above the guard post, he placed a small sonic device. That would create a distraction. The device was programmed to mimic the sound of footsteps in the corridor behind the guards. When it activated, all 4 guards turned to investigate, giving Heian the opportunity he needed to slip past their position. Level to clear, he reported, moving to final checkpoint. The last barrier before Taloneth's cell was the most formidable. Captain Vexter of the Draconian Guard stood watch with 6 of his most trusted warriors. They were elite soldiers, chosen for their skill and loyalty to the Council. Unlike the other guards, they had not been distracted by the power failures. They knew something was wrong, and they were ready for trouble. Motion sensor detected something on level 1, one of the warriors reported. But it disappeared before we could get a clear reading. Probably a maintenance drone, Vexler replied, his deep voice echoing through the corridor. But stay alert. If someone is trying to reach the prisoner, they will have to come through us. Hyun crouched in the shadows, studying the guard formation. Vexler was a 7-foot-tall giant with scales like armor and claws that could tear through steel. His warriors were almost as impressive, armed with energy weapons and protected by personal shields. A direct attack would be suicide. But Haeon had not come this far to give up now. He activated his plasma cutter and began working on the wall beside the guard post. The crystal structure was tough, but the cutter was designed to handle much harder materials. Slowly, carefully, he carved a hole large enough for him to pass through. "What was that noise?" one of the guards asked. "Structural stress from the power failures," Vexler replied. "These old crystals make strange sounds when the temperature changes." Haeon smiled grimly. The Draconian's explanation was reasonable, but wrong, and that mistake was about to cost him everything. The hole was finished just as the guards moved to investigate a false alarm triggered by one of Haeon's earlier devices. In the confusion, he slipped through the opening and found himself in the corridor behind their position. The central control room was just ahead. It's protected by a single automated defense system. The control room contained the master systems for the entire detention complex, including the neural dampeners that prevented prisoners from using their natural abilities. If Hyun could disable the dampeners, Taloneth would be able to help in her own rescue. The automated defenses were sophisticated, but they were designed to stop large, obvious threats. Haeon's stealth suit made him nearly invisible to their sensors, and his small size allowed him to move through gaps in their coverage. Within minutes, he was inside the control room. The main console was a maze of controls and displays labeled in a dozen different alien languages. But Haeon had studied similar systems during his training, and he could identify the key components. The neural dampener controls were clearly marked, protected by multiple security locks. "Override codes accepted," the computer announced as Haeon bypassed the security systems. "Neural dampener network disabled." 17 levels below, Taloneth felt the oppressive weight of the dampener lift from her mind. For the first time in days, her telepathic abilities returned in a flood of sensation. She could sense the minds of every being in the detention complex, from the confused guards to the determined human who had come to rescue her. "Hyun," she whispered, her voice carrying through the telepathic link. "You came. Promised I would not let them kill you," he replied through the mental connection. "Can you help me reach your cell? The guards are moving to investigate the control room," she warned. "You have perhaps 2 minutes before they discover what you have done." Hyun was already moving, following the directions that Taloneth projected, directly into his mind. The stealth suit was beginning to fail after hours of use, but it still provided enough concealment to get him past the remaining security barriers. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of discovery as the guards found the disabled control room. Shouts of alarm echoed through the corridors, and heavy footsteps began moving in his direction. But he was already at Taloneth's cell, working frantically to bypass the final security systems. "The energy barriers are failing," Taloneth reported, her voice stronger now that the dampener was gone. "I can feel my strength returning." "Good," Haeon said, placing his hands on the cell's control panel, "because we are going to need all the help we can get." The cell door dissolved just as Captain Vexler appeared at the end of the corridor. The Draconian warrior roared with rage as he saw the human helping his prisoner escape. Energy weapons began firing, filling the air with deadly beams of light. "You will not escape," Vexler bellowed, charging toward them with his claws extended. But Taloneth was free now, her full powers restored. Her forearms moved in complex patterns as she gathered energy from the quantum fields that surrounded her homeworld. The corridor filled with brilliant blue light as she prepared to face the guards who had held her captive. "Stay behind me," she told Han. "I will handle this." The battle was about to begin, and the outcome would determine not just their fate, but the future of two civilizations. The detention complex erupted into chaos as Talon-S powers fully awakened. Erd blue skin blazed with bioluminescent energy, casting dancing shadows on the crystal walls. The neural dampener lay broken at her feet, its control circuits fried. By the feedback from her released abilities, Captain Vexler charged forward with his energy weapon raised. But Taloneth was ready for him. Her four arms moved in perfect harmony, weaving patterns of force that deflected his shots and sent them ricocheting harmlessly into the walls. The Draconian warrior was skilled and powerful, but he had never faced an Aquilian sovereign at full strength. He could not escape, Vexler snarled, his claws sparking against the energy barriers that Taloneth had erected around herself and Hay. "The entire Citadel is sealed. Every exit is guarded." "We will make our own exit," Taloneth replied, her voice carrying new strength and determination behind the captain. 6 more guards rushed into the corridor, their weapons trained on. The escaped prisoner, Taloneth's telepathic abilities were working now, and she could sense their intentions before they acted. She moved with fluid grace, staying one step ahead of their attacks, while gradually forcing them back. The ceremonial. "Guards are coming," she warned Hayan through their mental link. "They will be here in minutes, and they are equipped with weapons designed specifically to neutralize my abilities." "Then we better move fast," Hyun replied, checking his remaining equipment. "Can you contact your allies? We need help if we are going to reach the surface." Taloneth extended her consciousness through the Citadel's communication networks, searching for the minds of those who remained loyal to her. The task was made more difficult by the ongoing power failures, but she had trained for years to use her abilities under adverse conditions. "Kilter," she called out telepathically, "I am free. Begin the final phase." 17 levels above, Kilter received the message and smiled grimly. The time for stealth and deception was over. Now came the direct assault that would either save their sovereign or doom them all. "This is Kilter to all loyal forces," he broadcasts on the emergency frequency. "The sovereign is free. Execute liberation protocol.
Ow.
All units converge on the detention complex." Throughout the Citadel, Aquilin guards who had been waiting for this moment sprang into action. They had been carefully positioned during the previous hours, using their legitimate duties to reach key positions without arousing suspicion. Now they revealed their true allegiance as they turned their weapons on the Council's forces. The battle spread quickly through the massive structure. In the communication centers, Minsu and Deho overpowered their supervisors and began broadcasting the truth about Talon's trial. The fabricated evidence was exposed, the paid witnesses were identified, and the Council's corruption was laid bare for all to see. "Citizens of the galaxy," Mince's voice echoed through every speaker in the Citadel, "you have been deceived. The charges against Sovereign Taloneth were false. The real criminals are the council members who condemned an innocent being to serve their own ambitions." In the Power Control Center, Swal-Young worked frantically to restore electricity to the areas held by Taloneth's supporters while keeping the council's strongholds in darkness. The complex network of cables and generators became a battlefield, as both sides fought for control of the Citadel's energy systems. Back in the detention complex, Taloneth and Hien fought their way through corridor after corridor of guards. The Sovereign's powers were impressive, but she was still weakened from days of imprisonment. The neural dampener had drained her strength, and she was operating on willpower alone. "I cannot maintain this pace much longer," she admitted as they paused between battles. "The dampener did more damage than I realized." "Then we need to find another way," Hyun said, studying the corridor ahead. "Is there a direct route to the surface from here?" "The ceremonial elevator," Taloneth replied. "It connects the detention complex directly to the council chambers, but it will be heavily guarded." "Everything is heavily guarded," Hyun pointed out. "At least this way we can reach the surface quickly." They changed direction, moving toward the ceremonial elevator that was used to transport condemned prisoners to their executions. The irony was not lost on either of them. They were using the very system designed to ensure Taloneth's death to facilitate her escape. The elevator was protected by a force field that required specific authorization codes to pass through, but Taloneth's restored telepathic abilities allowed her to read the codes directly from the minds of nearby guards. The barrier dissolved, and they stepped into the ornate chamber that had carried countless prisoners to their final fate. Level 1 Council Chambers, Taloneth commanded, and the elevator began its swift descent toward the surface. As they rose through the levels of the Citadel, you could hear the sounds of battle echoing through the structure. The rebellion was spreading, drawing in beings from dozens of species who had been waiting for someone to stand up against the Council's tyranny. "Your people are fighting well," Hyan observed, listening to the distant sounds of conflict. "They are not just my people anymore," Taloneth replied. "They are everyone who believes in justice and equality. Your actions have inspired something larger than either of us imagined." The elevator stopped with a soft chime, and the doors opened to reveal the main corridor of the council chambers. But instead of the usual crowd of diplomats and bureaucrats, they found themselves facing a wall of armed guards. The council had finally realized what was happening and had gathered their remaining forces to make a final stand. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick," called out Councillor Zarthik, his insectoid features twisted with rage. "Continue this rebellion, and we will make you suffer as an example to others. The only example here will be the fall of your corrupt regime," Taloneth replied, her voice carrying across the chamber. "You have ruled through fear and oppression for too long. Today that ends." The final battle was about to begin. Around them, the sounds of fighting grew louder as more of Taloneth's supporters reached the upper levels. The tide was turning, but the outcome was still far from certain. "Whatever happens," Hyan said, checking his weapon, "we finish this together." "Together," Taloneth agreed, her forearms beginning to glow with accumulated energy. The dawn light was beginning to filter through the crystal walls of the Citadel, painting everything in shades of gold and purple. It was supposed to be the hour of Taloneth's execution, but instead it would mark the beginning of a new era for the galaxy. The corrupt council members had gathered their remaining strength for one final assault. They had weapons, armor, and the advantage of position. But they faced something they had never encountered before, the combined determination of beings who refused to accept that justice was impossible. As the battle lines formed, both sides knew that this fight would determine the future of countless worlds. The old order was crumbling, and something new would rise from its ashes. Whether that something would be better or worse remained to be seen, but for now, there was only the fight and the hope that courage and determination would prove stronger than fear and corruption. The great council chamber had become a battlefield. Ancient crystal pillars that had stood for centuries now served as cover for opposing forces. The ornate ceiling, decorated with symbols of galactic unity, looked down on a scene of chaos and violence that would have been unthinkable just days before. Taloneth stood at the center of the chamber, her four arms weaving patterns of energy that held back waves of attacking guards. Her bioluminescent skin pulsed with power, but Hyan could see the strain in her movements. The neural dampener had weakened her more than she was willing to admit. "The main entrance is sealed," reported Kilter through the telepathic link. "But we have secured the eastern corridors. Reinforcements are coming." "Not fast enough," Taloneth replied, deflecting an energy blast that would have taken off Hyan's head. "But they have concentrated their remaining forces here. We are outnumbered 3-1. Council leader Veximer stood on the raised platform where he had pronounced Taloneth's death sentence just hours before. His gray skin was flushed with anger, and his red eyes blazed with hatred. Around him, the surviving council members huddled behind their personal guards. Watching the battle with growing desperation, "Kill them all," Veximer commanded. "Leave no survivors. This rebellion ends here." But even as he spoke, more of Taloneth's supporters were breaking through the defensive lines. Aquilian guards fought alongside human technicians. Centaurian medics stood beside Zephyrian engineers, and beings from dozens of species united in their desire for justice. "The communication arrays are back online," Minsu reported from the control center. "The entire galaxy is watching this battle. You can see what is really happening here." That news changed everything. The council had maintained power through secrecy and misinformation. controlling what the galaxy's citizens knew about their government. Now, for the first time, beings across hundreds of worlds could see the truth about their corrupt leaders. Broadcasting. On all frequencies, Deho added. Every world in the Alliance is receiving the signal. Taloneth seized the opportunity. Using her telepathic abilities, she projected her thoughts directly into the communication networks, speaking to every conscious. Being within range of the Citadel's transmitters, citizens of the galaxy, her voice echoed through space to countless worlds. You have been lied to. The Council told you that humans were dangerous, that they threatened the natural order. But the real threat comes from those who would divide us for their own gain. On the battlefield, the Council's guards began to hesitate. They had believed they were fighting terrorists and criminals, but now they could see the truth. The beings they faced were not monsters, but ordinary people fighting for their freedom and dignity. The evidence of my supposed crimes was fabricated, Taloneth continued, her mental voice carrying across the galaxy. The witnesses were paid to lie. Attacks blamed on human colonists were carried out by pirates using stolen ships. This was planned to justify a war that would have consumed millions of lives. Several guards laid down their weapons, unwilling to fight for leaders they now knew were corrupt. Others looked uncertainly at their commanders, waiting for orders that might never come. Vexamor realized that the battle was slipping away from him. In desperation, he activated the chamber's emergency defenses, filling the air with deadly energy, beams that targeted anyone not wearing a council identification badge. If I cannot rule this galaxy, he snarled, then I will see it burn. The automated weapons fired indiscriminately, forcing both sides to take cover. But the system had a fatal flaw. It was designed to protect the council members themselves, creating a safe zone around the raised platform where they stood. I have an idea, Hayan said, studying the defensive pattern. But it is dangerous. Everything we have done today has been dangerous, Taloneth replied. What do you need, a distraction? Something to draw their attention while I reach the control? Panel Taloneth nodded, understanding immediately. She began to gather energy from the quantum fields that surrounded her homeworld, drawing power from sources light years away. Her skin blazed with brilliant blue light as she prepared to unleash abilities that few beings in the galaxy had ever witnessed. Now, she said, and released a wave of pure force that shattered crystal pillars and sent guards flying across the chamber in the chaos that followed. He sprinted toward the control panel that operated the chamber's defenses. Energy beams tracked his movement, missing him by inches as he dove and rolled between cover points. His stealth suit was failing, but his determination was unshakable. He reached the control panel just as Vexamor realized what was happening. The council leader drew his personal weapon, plasma rifle capable of punching through armor, and took aim at the human who had destroyed his carefully laid plans. You should have stayed on your pathetic little world, Vexamor snarled, his finger tightening on the trigger, but before he could fire, Taloneth's telepathic abilities reached out across the chamber. She could not control Vexamor's mind directly, but she could influence his perception, making him see targets that were not there. The plasma bolt went wide, striking the wall beside Hyan's head. The human used the moment of confusion to activate the control panel, shutting down the automated defenses and opening the chamber's sealed entrances. The doors are open, Kilter reported, as his reinforcements poured into the chamber. The Citadel is ours. The remaining council guards surrendered quickly, overwhelmed by the flood of beings who had answered Taloneth's call. Within minutes, the corrupt leaders who had ruled the galaxy through fear and oppression found themselves prisoners in their own stronghold. This is not over, Vexamor warned as energy shackles were placed around his wrists. There are others who share my vision. They will not allow your naive idealism to destroy the order we have built. Then they will face the same fate as you, Taloneth replied calmly. The galaxy has chosen a new path, and we will defend it against all who would drag us back into darkness. As the sun rose fully over the crystal spires of the Citadel, the magnitude of what had been accomplished began to sink in. The corrupt council was defeated, their lies exposed, and their victims freed. But more importantly, beings from dozens of species had worked together to achieve something that had seemed impossible. "What happens now?" I asked as they stood together on the platform where Taloneth had been condemned to die. "Now we rebuild," she replied, her forearms gesturing toward the crowd of beings who filled the chamber. "We create a government that serves all species equally, not just the powerful few. We prove that diversity makes us stronger, not weaker." The broadcast continued to reach every corner of the galaxy, carrying the news of the rebellion's success. Two worlds that had never dared to hope for change. On human colonies, alien settlements, and mixed communities throughout space, beings watched the scenes from the Citadel with growing excitement. "The Alliance will be reformed," Taloneth announced, her voice carrying to billions of listeners. "The new government will be built on principles of equality, justice, and cooperation. Every species will have a voice, and every voice will be heard." In the days that followed, representatives from hundreds of worlds would arrive at the Citadel to participate in the creation of a new galactic government. The process would be long and difficult, with many challenges and setbacks along the way. But the foundation had been laid by a human who refused to accept that justice was impossible in an alien, who was willing to die for her principles. "No," Hyun said as they watched the celebration spreading through the chamber. "When I started this mission, I thought I was just trying to save one person. And instead, you saved us all," Taloneth replied. "That is what makes humans so remarkable. Yes. You see one person in need, and you act. You do not calculate the odds or worry about the consequences. You simply do what is right." As the twin suns of Kepler 4 to be climbed higher in the alien sky, the Citadel was transformed from a symbol of oppression into a beacon of hope. The corrupt council members were led away to face justice, while their victims were finally free to build the future they had always dreamed of. The rebellion was over, but the real work was just beginning. Building a better galaxy would require the efforts of countless beings from every species and every world. But for the first time in generations, that future seemed not just possible, done, but inevitable. And at the center of it all stood an unlikely partnership between a human commander and an alien sovereign, proving that sometimes the most powerful force in the universe is the simple refusal to give up hope.